I'm at Buslingthorpe in Lincolnshire, a place name that means Buslin's Hamlet, Buslin being a landowner here in the early 12th century. And there's not a lot here, just the Church of St Michael, which is now maintained by the Churches Conservation Trust, a farm and a couple of cottages. There's not been a lot here for many centuries. This is a deserted medieval village, and it was deserted early. There were only 10 people living here in the early 17th century, and the church was then in ruins. There were not many more in 1835 when the church, apart from its 13th century tower, was rebuilt by the Catholic architect and antiquary E.J. Wilson. Apparently the present church he built of yellow stock brick was the same size as the previous medieval building and replicated its details. Although there are few people here now, as you will hear, there are rather a lot of noisy rooks perched in the trees beside the church, and inside the church are two really interesting monuments to knights who once lived here. Okay, so here we are now inside, and as you see, it's a very simple 19th century interior with an aisleless nave and a smaller chancel beyond, all delightfully painted with Barbie pink distemper. And we need to head up the nave towards the chancel to see the first monument. Notice as we go that there is an original 13th century chancel arch here from the earlier church building, so it's not just the tower that remains from that structure. The first monument is this, a mid-14th century monument with an effigy of a knight on a tomb chest with his legs crossed. Incidentally, I probably mentioned this before in another video, as it's one of my hobby horses, but the crossed legs have nothing to do with the person having been on crusade. That's a great idea, but is a myth invented in the 19th century. The crossed legs are just to give the figure a sense of both life and of motion, as though he's just about to leap up to action. This effigy, the inscription around it tells us, is that of Sir John de Buslingthorpe, who was Lord of the Manor of Buslingthorpe and was born between 1277 and died between 1340 and 1344. The monument itself may be a little earlier, 5 to 10 years earlier, as it was not uncommon for people to prepare their monuments well before their death. It shows Sir John in the armour of the time. He's covered in chainmail from head to toe. He has a sword at his waist and a shield on his arm. His pillow is held up by two angels, and his feet rest on a lion, a symbol of chivalry. Here he is, ready to meet his maker, readied for war, but his hands placed in the attitude of prayer. The stone used for this effigy is Lincolnshire oolitic limestone, the same stone that Lincoln Cathedral is made of, and it is probable that the effigy was made by a mason in Lincoln. One of the details I really love about this effigy is this tiny, cheeky little imp holding up the scabbard of Sir John's sword. The tomb is not in its original position. We don't know where precisely it was originally, but before E.J. Wilson placed it where it is now, it was hemmed in by lots of pews, which may account for why it is in such fine condition. The second monument in this church is one of the most important in England. It is at the back of the church built into the wall. It is a coffin lid that was found by Wilson in 1835 on top of a stone coffin in the churchyard. Let into the stone is a monumental brass that shows a half effigy of a man in chainmail, his hands in prayer clasping his heart. This brass was once thought to date from the 1280s, but is actually in reality about 60 years later than that. But it's still among the earliest monumental brasses in the whole of England. The inscription around the edge of the stone says that this is Sir Richard, the son of Sir John de Buslingthorpe. There was only one Sir Richard de Buslingthorpe, and that was the son of the man commemorated by the stone effigy. This Sir Richard was born around 1306 and died in the 1360s. The brass itself may date from the 1340s, so Sir Richard prepared his last resting place well in advance of his demise. It is a very beautiful and graceful piece of engraving. Lastly, I want to take you into the tower to see this. Curiously, the lintel of the tower window has been formed from a recycled gravestone. The stone would once have covered the grave of a 14th century priest and bears his effigy. A priest who very probably knew and ministered to Sir John and Sir Richard de Buslingthorpe. These people, the de Buslingthorpes, have left little trace of themselves and their lives behind, except for these extraordinary monuments in this redundant church in this isolated spot in the Lincolnshire countryside. In their time, Buslingthorpe would have been much busier than at present. In the 14th century, they were the lords of a thriving manor, the focus of village life not only being the simple church, but their manor house, which lay to the east of it. There are no traces of the structure of the manor house left, but the moat that once surrounded it can still be seen, filled with water and surrounded by trees full of rooks. Thanks for watching.